Today we have something really super special. We are actually going to be doing an entirely new series. We just came off doing a series on strength training. Amber, I really loved our time talking about strength training.
Yeah, that was a good
Super
series.
fun.
hmm
But one thing that we're going to try to do with the Mind and Body podcast is we're going to try to rotate between subjects that relate more strictly to training the body, which we just did.
hmm
We dealt with a little bit of mindset.
Right.
But now we're going to shift to dealing with something directly related to our mind.
Yeah.
And we're going
And
to
mental health.
kind of do this on and off, and we'll see how things actually play out. So I'm excited for those who are listening in. We are beginning a series on anxiety and mental health.
Yes.
And we're going to be running this for the next couple of weeks, which this is a perfect time to talk about the subject, because even though going into the holidays, which you have Halloween, you have Thanksgiving, Christmas, all the fun festivities. It's hard to say. Running up to into the new year, it's exciting, but it's also a time where people can be very discouraged and
Yep.
very anxious. And so
Yeah.
we wanted to take the time just to unpack the nature of anxiety. There's there's a lot of talk about this, but
hmm
sometimes I don't know if you're this way, Amber, but there's so much information and articles and blogs that you could read about this topic, and it almost gets a bit overwhelming.
Yes.
Maybe not trying to be cheesy, but almost where it makes us anxious
Yeah.
because there's like information overload.
Overload
I
for
just
sure.
want a little bit of relief from some of these fears and struggles, this really deep feeling of anxiety that's kind of paralyzing me. How
hmm
do I do it? And it can be really hard to
Yeah.
to overcome.
Absolutely.
Now, in your past, this is interesting because it ties into your fitness journey.
Yeah.
You got into, if those who've been following our podcast for a while, I think it might have been our first one actually, where you went into anxiety disorder or panic attacks, I think more specifically, is what got you into fitness. So that's
hmm
kind of interesting. Why don't you tell us just maybe a short couple minutes of that and how it's impacted your life, and maybe like well, you don't have to go into the solution yet. Maybe just tell us how it was a problem.
Sure. Yeah. So I was about 21 and I grew up in a home in in an environment, even just beyond my home, that mental health really wasn't talked about. It wasn't really discussed. Basically, it was if you have any emotional issues, take it to Jesus and he'll fix everything. And don't get me wrong, I believe that Jesus can fix a lot of things, but basically, it was a write off. And when I was 21, I was having issues breathing. I would fall into what I now can label as panic attacks. I did not know what they were at the time, but basically, my mind was racing. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All these things. And it would happen to me again and again. And it got to a point that I was having a panic attack almost every single day. And it wasn't until I started reading up on anxiety that I was actually able to figure out what was quote unquote wrong with me and what was going on. And so, yes, that's what spiraled me into trying to find solutions on how to deal with anxiety. And my relationship with anxiety has shifted and morphed over the years. At one point, I was on medication for it. Now I am not. I've weaned myself off medication, with my doctor, and tried to approach dealing with it in other more natural ways. So yeah, my history goes back a few years with it, and it's not fun. And this is the more I read on it, the more I'm aware of it, the more I'm in the health and fitness industry, I realize that mental health issues is a prevailing thing that's just going up and up now. Ever
Yeah,
since, especially since the pandemic, right?
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, According to World Health Organization, anxiety disorders are the most prevalent mental health condition
Hmm.
globally, affecting approximately 284 million people worldwide.
That's a
And
lot.
even those that are going into treatment, they say that there's only a 40% success rate of actually people overcoming their anxiety. And
Wow.
then it's an even smaller success rate of those who, they have, if you want to say, they learn to manage it, not just for a short season while they're in therapy, but it's an ongoing practice.
Right.
And so it's a huge need. And I don't give that, for those who are listening in, I don't give those numbers to paint a picture that it's hopeless. Like, man, this is
Right.
so widespread. Hardly anybody actually tends to manage it appropriately. And I'm using my language carefully here because
That's a sensitive subject.
a couple of things. One, having anxiety and a panic attack are not the same thing.
Right.
They're connected, but I think it's important for someone, some of the things that we may be talking about today may not necessarily cure that panic attack.
Mhm.
I mean, my wife had a panic attack recently, and there wasn't anything particular that she was anxious about, but it was a cumulative effect of just
Mhm.
stress. And underneath that was anxiety, but there was nothing like immediately causing her to fear, but her body went into that reaction, which to her felt like a heart attack,
Yeah.
and so just making this distinction there. And but also there's a way to really combat what we would call this anxiety epidemic that's taking place. And as you
Hmm.
said, when the pandemic happened, all these numbers that I'm talking about went up just about 25%. It's really high among our youth today.
Yes, it
We
is.
have the most anxious young people culture today more than any other time. I think what I understand from the National Institution of Mental Health, nearly 1 out of 3 adolescents, which is 31.9%, experience an anxiety disorder by the age of 18. Now,
Which is
that stat was actually,
wild.
yeah, and this stat was actually prior to the pandemic. So again,
And so
it's
imagine how
definitely.
much more it is now.
Exactly, exactly. And so you have
That's insane.
all types of reasons why this is the case, but it's causing, problems in our economy. People having a hard time going back to work since they've been
Mhm.
remote. Um, the impact on productivity. Um, I think let me see here. The World Health Organization said this leads to an estimate loss just in general productivity of 2.8% of annual gross domestic production in
Mhm.
various countries. So just everybody's productivity is sitting a little bit lower. Um, this was just because of anxiety disorders on the rise, but also the pandemic played a big thing. So it's huge. And if you study this topic um, just more directly, you'll find that anxiety is just the gateway to so many other problems, personal and social problems. Like, for
Right.
instance, like anxiety about finances, which probably a lot of us have
Yeah.
from time to time, at least,
Especially
can
in this
give rise
economy.
to like um, just a general feeling of covetousness and greed,
Mhm.
or maybe even like hoarding and potentially even stealing.
Mhm.
But then it's interesting, like when you're anxious and it causes these things, and if you go and hoard or steal, then you're going to be anxious about
The
being found
repercussions of
out.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yes.
it puts you on this vicious cycle. Anxiety about success at some task can make you irritable or abrupt. Anxiety about relationships can make you withdrawn, indifferent, and caring.
Mhm.
Anxiety about how someone will respond to you could make
Mm.
you either avoid
Avoid
a conversation,
conversations.
cover up, lie. So it's
That
just huge.
that one's huge, especially in relationships, and I can assimilate with that very strongly. Like when you have to talk with someone and you know they're not going to respond favorably, just the avoidance becomes easier. But then you have the anxiety of knowing that you have to have that conversation and you can't mentally get there. Mhm. No,
Yeah,
these are some
yeah.
really good points.
What do you think, like anxiety for you? So I'm just when you become anxious, how does Amber, what does it lead to for you? Like, what are some other, like, what does the gateway lead to for you personally? So I'll
Like
start.
if
You could
okay,
think and I'll start here. Like for
okay.
me, when I become really just fearful of the future, I can tend to, I can tend to get really super tired.
Hmm.
And some people go and they're like a workaholic. I
Yeah.
kind of wish that was me. I wish I was like, oh, I'm stressed. Let me go do some work that's going to make me a lot of money. I
Yeah.
almost wish I had that reaction, but I'm just like, I get tired and I almost want to, like, I find myself wanting to take a nap or something like
Mm-hmm.
that if I just sleep. And sometimes that's a good thing, but I find that I am not nearly as social.
Mm-hmm.
Like I just feel like pulling in, that it's usually times where like I'm not responding or I'm not returning calls like I should or not responding to text. I'm just kind of, I recluse.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more quiet. I'm not like a go cry in my pillow type of a person. Like I'm just not like a really, can you see that? Me weeping into my pillow. I'm that's not me as much. I
Face
just
planted.
really turn in. I get this kind of grumpy look on my face. I'm just, or maybe more meditative, like I'm just trying to think. And but sometimes I can't distinguish between like thinking for a solution and
Mm-hmm.
just worry, you
Yeah.
know. And that's kind of how I can get. And I think probably playing into that, I can get a little bit snippy,
Mm.
but I think it's more like
Some good self-awareness here.
yeah, you like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think what happens for
I'm
me is like
impressed.
there will be a problem that happens,
Mm-hmm.
and the problem's not really that big deal. Kids are a little bit louder. Kids brought mud in or something. I don't know, just making up something.
I was to
And
say that was a very dad thing to say.
my reaction is more energized,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm thinking, well, the reason I react this way is because there's mud. You guys did this, or you ruined that, or you whatever. I got three crazy boys, so
Yeah.
this can happen. But really, what's happening is I'm very anxious and I'm not really managing it well.
Mm-hmm.
So now these other little problems, yeah, probably wouldn't have as strong of reaction.
But they're
But
magnified.
yeah,
Mm.
exactly. So tell me what's your,
When I
does Amber have
am
self-awareness?
does Amber has a lot of self-awareness. I I'm thankful and for it, and at other times I'm like, wow, I wish I didn't know about this about myself. But here we are. Um, when I am anxious, see, I can go one way or the other. It depends on what the anxiety is about. If it's a relationship type of anxiety, I definitely am like similar to you. I become reclusive, um, quiet. I turn very inwardly. Um, but I do like to busy myself. And it's definitely an avoidance tactic. Something that I've recognized in myself in the past like year or so. Um, of I didn't realize that I can be an avoidant. And um, so if it has to do with relationships, it's that. If it has to do with pretty much anything else other than relationships, I actually am very productive when I'm anxious. I clean my house like crazy. I get a lot of stuff done. I am a busy bee. I'm energized. And again, it actually is a form of a coping mechanism or avoidance. So I swing both ways. It just depends on where the anxiety is coming from for me.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for those who are listening, next week we're going to deal with how to break the what we call anxiety cycle, and it's
Yes.
Dr. Judson Brewer who came up, I think, or he might have borrowed the term, but I remember reading in his book Unwinding Anxiety. He said that
That's the one I'm reading. I'm reading that
yes,
book.
oh, it's such a good book.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, we'll be able to get him on. That would be cool to have him on the
That would be
channel. We'll
really
see what
cool.
happens there. But he mentions, like, he calls it a habit cycle or an anxiety loop. And
Mm-hmm.
he talks about how things are, you get your triggers
Mm-hmm.
to trigger the anxiety, the behaviors that you run to cope with your anxiety,
Yes.
and then the results or the rewards that come. And he's using rewards in a more general sense, like, um, because actually the results could be kind of negative.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the behaviors I link to me being triggered and being anxious, can
Mm-hmm.
actually lead me into seeing results that make me more anxious,
Mm-hmm.
which could lead to more behaviors, to poorer results, to being more triggered, to more behaviors, to bad results.
Right.
And it's like a really vicious cycle. And a lot of people are on it and they just don't know how to break it. And
Yeah. Some
you
people
need
are on it
more.
and they don't realize they're on it either.
Exactly. And you need
Mm-hmm.
more than just self discipline, like, oh, I'm going to stop being anxious. You actually got to understand
I
all the
wish it was a light
habits.
switch situation.
Right. Yeah.
that, that would be
You have to
great.
realize the habits that are fortifying this type of reaction.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be a change of that.
Right.
But you also have to change, or the way they say it in psychology is you have to develop some mindfulness or an
Yes.
awareness of what is my brain doing, and I'm
Yeah.
just actually being subject to how my brain naturally flows rather than being aware and
Mm-hmm.
retraining my brain to do what I want it to do, which is the
Yes.
subject of neuroplasticity, which is
Good
our
word.
brain is very capable of rewiring. We
Yes.
could change the chemistry of our brain, but a lot of people, they're not aware of that, so they don't change their mindset,
No.
or to be more scientific, the hormonal components of their brain being able to see that changed over time through particular habits of thinking.
Right.
And so they just try to change the behaviors. And you really need to go at both of these. Changing the behaviors can actually help with your mindset,
Right.
but also you have to be working on your mindset to see a consistency of change of behavior.
Right.
And once these two things are in sync, you could see really powerful transformation, which we'll get to more next week. But before we kind of jump ahead of dealing with this problem, so we know it's an epidemic. We know there's problems. We've talked about how it leads to other problems. Now, here's what could happen, though, is we can conclude that anxiety itself is something really bad. Like, we need to conquer anxiety. I don't know if
Yeah.
you've ever heard, like, in a Christian context, you can even hear sermons like how to conquer anxiety, things
Mm-hmm.
of that nature. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that conquering is really the right way to think of it. Think of a better way of thinking of it is like, how do I learn to manage it appropriately
Mm-hmm.
so that I actually allow the healthy form of anxiety to be there?
Because there is a healthy
And
amount of anxiety.
the energized anxiety that's crippling me, I want to be able to be mindful, aware of that, and
Yes.
be able to make a mental shift so that it kind of loses its impact or loses the wind behind the sails type of a thing. So scientifically, what happens in our brain, this is from Dr. Judson Brewer that I learned so much from. He said anxiety is controlled by our survival brains.
Right.
So, like, primitively, we have in our brains, he called it the old brain, but the automatic nervous system, this is the fight, flight, and freeze
Mm-hmm.
mechanism. So when something happens, our body has a defense way of going about things. So it might jump into fight. Like, for instance, I might not even be thinking of it, but if a dog ran into our yard to attack my kids, I wouldn't have to go through this logical, like, what's the best option here?
Right. You would
My dad
automatically be
mode
at
would
it.
click in. I'd be up. I would be, doing fighting the dog, if it was,
Right.
hostile or whatever, fight mode.
Right.
Or we know this when we have this moment where we're in a dark room and all of a sudden we feel like someone's there and we run up the stairs really fast. I don't know if you ever done that before, Amber.
No, actually. So, do you have a when it comes to fight, flight, or freeze? Everybody has one that they tend to go for more automatically, right? And it's usually personality based. And sometimes it's also directed by circumstances in life, right? Or things you've been through. Do you have a particular one that you lean towards? Are you a fight person?
Fight.
Yeah. So am I. I am a natural
And I don't
fight
I don't
instinct.
mean like I'm mean about it. I
Right,
just
right.
typically am just
But you're
like,
ready to
there's a problem,
defend.
I'm running toward it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm the same way. I'm the same way. So no, when you're talking about like somebody being in the room and like running up the stairs? No, I'm probably looking for the person because I'm about to nail someone.
You're probably using all these expletives and like, we'll save that for now. But like, I could just see you like
You're not
yelling at
wrong.
someone. If you're in here, I'm going to
I will
whatever.
find
Yeah.
you.
This is the
Makes me
nice way of
sound
putting it for Amber.
it makes me sound so violent, but yes. Yeah,
But what
but
makes me more
continue.
anxious is
Mhm.
when I feel like I want to go into fight mode, but there's nothing there to fight and I don't know what to do next.
Yes.
Like if we're using the analogy, I'm like swinging my fist at the air and I realize this is wasting my time. What do I do? I can't come up with a solution and I become
Mm,
anxious. And maybe
yeah,
I get to where I freeze, you
lack of
know.
solution. Yes. Mhm.
So, but this, if we conquered for those who are listening in, I'm putting this in quotes, okay?
Mhm.
Um, to conquer anxiety and say, oh, I never have this issue ever again, which isn't really impossible if you're a
Yeah.
human being. You know, it's impossible. But to kind of have that as a goal, you really don't want that because you do want this fight, flight, or freeze, or all those words. You want to be able to have that reaction, not where it's necessarily controlling you, but like for instance, if I'm walking down the street and I'm doing like what most Americans do, I'm trying to multitask. So I'm looking at my
Mhm.
phone, I'm answering emails. And if I'm in a busy city like Seattle, walking down the street, and I wasn't paying attention, and all of a sudden I find myself walking out in the middle of traffic.
Mhm.
Well, I hope I'm anxious at that moment.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
don't want to be like super
self-preservation.
chill. Like
Mhm.
I want my body to respond where I'm jumping out of the way or whatever. I respond,
Right.
to that situation. And when that happens, your prefrontal cortex shuts off. And that's all of your ability to reason, to plan, to think ahead. And you jump into this mode.
Right.
So that's good. That's healthy.
Yes.
And there also is when you're using your prefrontal cortex to plan ahead, but the future is unclear. Have you ever been there? Like you're actually using
Huh.
those faculties,
Yeah.
but you can't plan, you can't see a clear future. That's where we become anxious in a
Mhm.
way that's maybe not like the fight, flight, or freeze mode.
Right.
It's just a kind of a low level anxiety that's building
Yeah, of
because I
not
can't
being
see a
in
clear.
control and you can't see an answer. Yep.
Yeah, and that's
Mhm.
where it gets really, really difficult and hard. But even that anxiety that's there, we should be asking like, okay, why am I getting anxious? Like,
Right.
what's really at the root of that? Because if we
Yes.
can do that, because like for instance, to kind of use an analogy here, if like a food analogy, if I am um, or let's use a different analogy. Let's compare anxiety to physical pain.
Okay.
If I have physical pain and I'm feeling it, well, physical pain is negative.
Right.
I don't think anybody's like, yes, wow, I have back pain. This is amazing. But the back pain actually is a signal that something is not right.
Right.
So
Correct.
I should be asking why is this the case, and be
Mhm.
curious about why my back is actually having this pain. I could look for a solution, all that kind of stuff. So
Right.
anxiety actually can be a type of pain that signals to us that something is wrong. But I think if we, instead of just saying, how do I get rid of the symptom, I
Mhm.
become curious
What's the
so that I
source?
can actually find the solution.
Yeah.
And that
This
curiosity actually takes the wind out of the sails. I don't get into crazy worry mode. I'm asking questions. I'm curious, and it can actually begin the process of reasoning through whatever I'm anxious. Doesn't remove the anxiety, but it
Mhm.
allows me to manage it. Now I don't know if you have any thoughts on this. I was going to share something from a book I was reading, but do you have any thoughts on this, Amber?
I do. And then I'll let you come back and tell me about this book. Um, so actually, this is something my therapist and I have been talking about because though I am much better at managing my anxiety now, we were talking about the fact that I am a very logical thinker. And I think in certain, in most situations, um, approaching anxiety in a logical way. So taking the emotion out of it, because it's very emotional, and boiling it down to, all right, I am anxious. What is the environment that is causing my anxiety? Is it a person, a place, a situation, a circumstance, or a memory, right? And figuring out where's the source or the quote unquote trigger of what it is. And okay, once you've boiled it down and found an answer, or maybe there's multiple answers, because you could be anxious about multiple different things, right? But finding those answers and then figuring out, okay, so I want to manage my anxiety. How can I manage the trigger points that I have discovered about myself? And it comes down to, you have to sit down with yourself. You have to sit in the uncomfortable, and you have to think logically through this. And what's it called? Like self-awareness. That's what I'm looking for. It is a form of self-awareness. And some people, I know a lot of people that they just live their life. They label themselves. I'm an anxious person. I am this. I am that. And what they're doing by labeling themselves that is they have a mindset frame of there's no way to change it. And I know a lot of people that are like that. They don't know how to change. And it's because they lack self-awareness, and they lack the guts that it takes to boil it down and problem solve into these solutions. And so my therapist and I were talking about the fact that I am very good at figuring out why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling and approaching it from a logical stance and removing myself from those situations, those people, the circumstances, removing yourself from memories. Some people would call it like trauma memories. For me, I feel like trauma is a very excessive word, but it's a form of trauma because it's now set a new form of neural pathways in your brain, how you think about different places, things, people, all this stuff. But the memories, those are the hard ones. It's a form of PTSD. Those are the hard ones to really detach from. But all that being said, I encourage people that if you're struggling with anxiety, sit down with yourself in a quiet space, create some time for yourself, and figure out where this anxiety is coming from. But yeah, let's come back to that book you were talking about.
Well, man, what you said was just so good.
Yeah.
Borrowed from your therapist, but I like it. You know, so we're all telling ourselves a story.
Yes.
Like we're framing everything that we see
and labeling.
hear. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so within the story, what helps us make sense of components in the story is the label, type of thing. And we label ourselves within that story. And one big part of therapy, this is why it actually is so freeing for people, is that somebody else is able to step in and actually help us to tell the story differently,
Yes.
But they're obviously, with a therapist, they're professional at it, and they're going to be really careful about, you have to be careful about hearing someone else's story because they may not quite have it right too. It takes time. That's why curiosity, understanding how your brain works, how it's like, hey, the way I'm feeling is not necessarily bad because it might be highlighting a real problem, but let me think through this. Let me be curious about it. That approach to anxiety actually reframes this particular aspect of my story. I'm helping to reframe it, which can lead to different behaviors, different outcome. But I like what you're saying though, because you're going back to these things and you're resetting these stories. Like if somebody just always, they label themselves within their narrative, I'm an anxious person. They have trained their brain to think a certain way, which could be retrained, which could lead to actually different behaviors, which could lead to different outcomes. But right now they just feel like, this is who I am. This is what I do.
This is how it
just
will
the way
always
it is.
be.
Yeah, which sets them up for actually becoming a self-fulfilled prophecy.
Yes.
And
literally
that's
that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So one thing that what's his name? Scott Symington,
Mm-hmm.
PhD. He wrote a book. It's called Freedom from Anxiety, Thoughts, and Feelings, a two-step mindfulness approach for moving beyond fear and worry. And he does this. He brings up this concept, and I really like it. And I think this is a good way for us to cap our conversation today.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he says that you want to look at life as almost just conceptually like you have two screens in front of you. One screen is all of the good,
Uh-huh.
your hopes, the good things, just everything that's beautiful is on the screen. And then you have on this other screen is your fears, what you dread,
Mm-hmm.
all that, just really the negative.
Mm-hmm.
So he basically said that what people do is they have one or two reactions that really make them anxious. One, they try to ignore the negative screen altogether. There is no negative. There's just
Right.
positive.
Only
Good, good,
positive.
good. I'm going to be a positive person. The power of positive thinking. And actually they become
That's
more
how I used to be.
yeah, they become
Yep.
more anxious because they know the screen's there
Mm-hmm.
and they don't want to look at it. They almost feel like there's a sense of guilt and shame to even look that way because that's not what
Oh,
positive
that's a good
people
point.
do.
Mm-hmm.
And so just be preoccupied with the good. And there's just this nagging, you know, I don't know how to put it. Nagging feeling is what I was looking for. Nagging feeling underneath that to say there's a lot of what is real and true that's on the other screen and I'm ignoring it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm never going to get through and actually control my feelings until I address what's on that negative screen.
Mm-hmm.
But then he says there's another problem. There's people that ignore the screen altogether. Then there's the people who obsess
Over the
over the
negative.
other screen, and
Yeah.
all they can be preoccupied is with the fears, what they dread,
Mm-hmm.
and they actually bring some of these things that are just not real. They're just thoughts in the head, right?
Yeah.
But they bring them into almost reality because they obsess over it. And
Yeah.
they're
I
like,
know
this is going
people
to
like that.
happen. Have you
Mm-hmm.
ever been around somebody who's been so anxious? They're like, I'm probably going to lose all of you as my friends because you guys don't want to be around me because I'm a real anxious person. And they just keep
Mm-hmm.
making that awkward and they keep
Yeah, yeah.
talking
I
about it.
actually know several people that are like that and that
Yeah.
literally
And
ruin their own lives by being like that all the time.
but
Mm-hmm.
then they do it. There's a dopamine hit though, because they actually
Yeah.
feel they have a sense of righteousness or rightness when they say, see, you guys left. I was right.
Yeah.
This happens every time. And then what ends up happening is I move somewhere else or I change my job or I change my circles. But they keep telling the same negative story
Mm-hmm.
and it gets fortified. The plot thickens as they begin to see everywhere I go, I'm seeing this, so it must be true. They're
Yes.
obsessed with a negative screen.
Not realizing they're bringing their own relationship and life demise upon themselves.
Right. So what Scott said is
Dang.
yeah, right. So what Scott said was
Heavy.
the way to overcome one of these two scenarios, ignore it altogether or obsess over it, is actually to first have your general disposition, your general direction pointed at the good. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what is the good? Learning to have daily rhythms of acknowledging the good. It's hard to really just be swallowed up with anxiety when you can actually be thankful for good things in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Even when bad things are happening, like I'm going to take every day, I am going to be thankful. I'm also going to be compassionate towards myself if I stumble and fail and all this type of things. I'm going to be curious about things, but I'm generally going to be looking at the good. But I'm going to take time to stop, look at the other screen,
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge that it's there.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, when you acknowledge that it's there instead of avoiding it, you're actually taking a step towards those things and managing them right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like
That's
I
so good.
accept that they're there, I acknowledge them, and even label them.
Yeah.
I am feeling anxious.
Yeah.
I am fearful because my future's unclear.
Yeah.
I just lost my job and I don't see a pathway to a new one right now. So I'm anxious.
Mm-hmm.
So just being able to talk about it, to process it, to actually feel those whatever those emotions may be,
Yeah.
is a pathway forward, but he's also staying tethered to what is good and what is beautiful and what is working and what relationships he does have in his life or her life that are working. He says that if you can learn to keep this as the general trajectory towards the good, I acknowledge all the negative emotions, I allow myself to feel them. And some therapists will do this. I'm not suggesting this for everyone listening that this is the way, but some people take time every day to say, hey, I'm going to set a timer and I'm going to set 15 minutes to allow myself to feel these feelings, the negative things that are going in my life. Now, sometimes you know how these feelings hit you. You can't always plan it. Can't
Right.
always set a timer. But I think the
But in
principle is, say
in
again.
doing something like that, like I feel like for people such as myself who are avoidance to negative emotions, forcing yourself to like sit, I should say, instead of forcing, I should say creating the habit of getting yourself to sit in those negative emotions. Or if you're the opposite side and you sit in the negative all the time, setting the habit of thinking through all the good in your life, that's where the mindset change and the shift happens.
Yeah, 100%. So we have to actually close this episode down today. We have a little bit more limited window for our recording, but I just want to give you a couple of things to walk away with for those who are listening. If you find yourself anxious, just know you're not alone. All of us have levels of anxiety. There's no
Yes.
person on the planet. If you're human, you're going to be anxious.
Yeah.
Don't think about trying to I got to conquer this as much as how do I learn to manage this in a mature way?
Yeah.
And a good way to start is actually just to be mindful of being
Work on
aware.
mindfulness.
Okay, I'm being anxious. This isn't necessarily bad.
Mm-hmm.
I need to find out why I'm anxious, which leads to curiosity, which every person that I know that's in psychology that deals with anxiety says that psychology is like being curious is like a superpower in de-energizing anxiety. So just being curious, asking yourself questions, it causes you to slow down, and instead of it being in that panic worry mode, you're just asking yourself questions. Have you ever been anxious and someone does this for you? It says, "Hey, let's think this through. Let me ask you questions." And the way they ask, they're also very compassionate. It tends to calm you down, like a good therapist does this.
Yeah.
You become this for yourself. You learn to calm yourself down. Sometimes it's good to do some exercises of focus, like for instance, like breathing exercises, which goes back to I think what we have on record that breathing exercises date back to 500 BC that we
Wow.
have in written literature, and it goes
Wow.
and it's been practiced for years before that where they would actually breathe. And all of these, the breathing idea, I was listening to a therapist that they actually take an object and they say, focus on the object, focus on the wall, focus on the object that they're
Wow, it's like
holding,
a brain
focus on
exercise.
then they do another one that goes like say, listen to the noises in the room, listen to the noises outside the room, listen to the noises that you're the furthest you can reach with your ears. Now come back to the room. All
Wow.
of those exercises are designed to do one thing, to take a scattered mind person and bring them to focus.
Huh. I should
Like,
probably do
hey, I'm
those.
trying to control my breath. That's something I control. I can't control the circumstance, but I can control my breath. I can control my sight. I can control my hearing. And they'll do a combination of these exercises to bring me back into being a controlled, focused person. And now I start to get curious, ask questions. This is another way of calming myself down. So this is a path to being mindful about what's happening rather than just being, controlled by the rage of emotion. And so there's no silver bullet. It's not just like, oh, I did my breathing thing and I'm still anxious.
Yeah.
Well, probably because you're not quite yet focused yet. And you're trying to bring yourself to that state of mind. But we're going to unpack this in a lot more detail
This
on
is going to
how
be
to
such a
think.
good series.
I'm excited. Oh man, and I'm learning so much, and we're hoping to bring on some more people onto the channel too that have expertise in these areas. We're going to be drawing upon their knowledge. It's going to be really good. So thank you
Yeah.
guys so much for joining, and I hope you guys have a great day. Thanks for joining.